just so you know, John Mattingly, he's not able to join us for this session. There's a personal matter that came up. It's understandable. So it's going to be us three speaking.
Okay, sounds good.
Yeah, fine.
All right, we'll get started. So thank you guys for joining us for this conversation, discussing poverty and criminality and how they intersect with each other, or do they intersect with each other? So we'll be discussing all this. Um, Before I get going, I would like to introduce the panel that we have. Like I said before, John Mattingly is not able to join us for this episode due to some personal matters, but we do have Nicki Clyne and we have Nicole as well, Nicole Lovett. So Nicki, you want to introduce yourself?
Sure thing. My name is Nicki Clyne. My full name is actually Nicole, so I'm glad that that I stuck with my nickname, just to keep it clear. So my introduction into the criminal justice field was a personal one, and I specifically was investigated by the federal government and had people very close to me arrested, and I prepared for about 6 months also to face that fate. So in that time, I got a crash course in the federal system. I also started speaking to people in prison because I was very impressed, but not in a good way, about the conditions, about the ways that people end up in prison, which I think a lot of the world doesn't realize, or at least a lot of the country kind of doesn't understand how it works if they've never met someone who's been to prison, or haven't been involved themselves. So it was very eye-opening for me. And like I said, I speak to a lot of people in prison now, and I'm very passionate about bringing awareness and tools and just greater insight to the process in helping it be more just and ethical, as well as treating people who are incarcerated or have been with more humanity.
Okay, thanks for introducing yourself. Nicole?
Hi, my name is Nicole Lovett. I'm a family law attorney in Philadelphia, but I mostly represent victims of domestic violence. And a lot of times my clients are failed by the system on two ends. And one end is they get arrested or they get swept up with the criminal justice system because they are being abused, and somehow no one takes the time to find out who's the abuser and who's being abused. And the second way is that our DA lets off a lot of violent criminals, including domestic abusers. And then my clients have to deal with seeing them. If they have children with them, they still have to bring the children.
Nicki, can you hear me?
I can hear you. Yeah, it cut out for me, so I just wasn't sure
Okay.
if I was the only one.
It's the mysterious cutout. Um, Nicole, are you back?
Oh.
I'm back. I
Okay.
think I don't know where I cut off. I was talking to myself, I guess.
You were talking about the DAs.
Yeah. How we have Krasner, who is a notoriously lenient DA, at least for some people, and a lot of my clients' abusers don't see time, or they see very little time, and the office isn't even good at communicating with them. So like I said, my clients get it on both ends. But I'm actually also a psychotherapist, and I'm not practicing now, but I had a lot of clients who were imprisoned. And I agree with Nicki that, you know, the conditions are awful and definitely need to be improved.
Okay. Well, I appreciate you introducing yourself, and we'll definitely get into all of that. This is just a open conversation. It can flow either direction, but for the people who aren't familiar with me, my name is Adam Coleman. I'm the author of a book called Black Victim to Black Victor. I'm also the founder of Wrong Speak Publishing, which is a free speech oriented, free thought platform where myself and I invite other people to express themselves, even if it's counter to the narrative, especially if it's counter to the narrative. I'm a huge advocate on free speech and free thought. And obviously, I'm the host of the show, A Good Faith Space. So we'll jump into it. Part of the reason why I wanted to talk about poverty and criminality and linking them together, actually, I believe I brought it up with Nicki Clyne before, because I do have a little bit of an annoyance when we do talk about criminality. The first thing that we bring up is poverty. And as someone who, as a child, was homeless a couple times, and as an adult was homeless, I was in poverty for a period of time in my life. We were able to come out of it, but it's the automatic link that people jump towards, that someone's criminality is due to their poverty, right? It could be a factor, right? But that's to imply that someone wealthy wouldn't break the law. I mean, we call them white collar crimes for a reason, but they're still breaking the law. They still knowingly do something that is immoral. And so, in many ways, I see a lot of the criminality that might happen that we do talk about, whether it be violent or let's say theft or things of that nature that might be happening in an impoverished neighborhood, could be just people who are either immoral or lack a moral compass or maybe not a moral compass, but lack the understanding that they're about to cross a line that they shouldn't cross. And maybe there is a level of desperation for some people, but I think it's really dangerous to say, well, someone is committing crimes because they're poor, because that way of thinking is why we see San Francisco and the level of criminality that is at hand when people are shoplifting from stores. And we have people like AOC who says, oh, well, they're just taking stuff to feed their family. Clearly they're not. There's a black market for items that are being stolen from retail outlets. This is part of a criminal network that's at hand. So, the vast majority of people who are poor are not criminals. They're not violent. They're not stealing stuff to support themselves. They are working hard. They're working the best that they can. Maybe some of them are getting support from the government, but the vision of the poor person as just being one step away from a criminal, I think is personally offensive as someone who's been in poverty before. My mother never had the idea of stealing something to survive, right? It takes a certain level of someone to think of that. And especially in a country where we have so many different resources. I also hate when people act like we don't have resources for people who are poor to get support. There are a ton of resources that are available, especially if you're someone who has children. Are they the best? Is it a ton of money or anything like that? No, but if you think that the next step is to steal something or to break the law or to sell drugs or to commit some sort of crime, an immoral act just to survive, then there are definitely services that are available via the government to prevent you from making that step. So these are conscious choices that are made by people. So I know I'm speaking a little bit here, but what do you guys think of as far as what I'm saying?
I'll start. So I think it's a confluence of factors, and I think that the issue with having discourse around these things, and like you say, you know, people link poverty to crime, and I believe there are links. So I disagree with you on which I'll define. But the issue, I think, first of all, is that we don't make distinctions. And what we like to do is we like to generalize. So, you know, there's people who think poverty is an excuse. And then there are people who say, no, that it's not an excuse. And here are all the examples of people who grew up poor, who did not choose crime. And on the other, there's all these studies and statistics on how people who are, you know, who are grow up in poverty, then, you know, end up in prison. And the thing is, we're not looking at all the different factors that contribute. Now, you know, the fact that you, it sounds like, had a, I'm not trying to make this personal, I could use anyone in the same circumstances as you who had a parent who did not, drugs did not have certain influences that may have opened the door to choosing crime as an option. You know, there are, I know people who grew up in the Bronx who at 11 years old, you know, didn't have a father and had a mother who was ended up dying and passing away when they didn't have, you know, parental figures to take care of them. So what do you do as an 11-year-old? And not only that, you're in a neighborhood where, you know, there's gangs, people willing to give you little jobs to make
Hey,
sure there's
Nikki,
opportunities. Yeah.
I'm sorry to
Is
cut
there
you
a weird
off.
sound?
Yeah,
I don't,
Nicole,
that's weird.
are you
Yes.
having a weird thing going on with your mic?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, it
Okay,
keeps
because mine,
Yeah,
going.
there's just a,
yeah, mine had cut off too. Um, so I definitely see what
Oh,
you're saying. Yeah.
hold on one second. I'm sorry.
Okay.
No, because we were getting a sound that was going in and out on
yeah, I
your
don't know what
speaker.
that is. I heard it as
On
well.
mine?
But I wasn't sure if it was just me.
Yeah. Now, okay. Now you're muted. Nikki,
But is
you
it
want
not,
to
is it
try?
me?
No,
Can't
I think
tell.
she's fine now.
No? Oh, okay. So there's a confluence of factors, and you know, it's complex. It takes a lot of work and effort to kind of pull these things apart and make distinctions between the types of environment. Oh, it's back. What is that? Is that, what does that sound? I
It's
can take my
Nicole.
earpods out. Oh,
My
okay, okay.
mic keeps.
It's weird because it looks like she's on mute and then it's not.
Can you turn my mic
Oh,
off because it keeps going back on?
How about this? Why don't you leave and come back in and I'll make you speaker again, okay?
Okay.
Okay.
it's the
All
classic
right.
just unplug and plug back in. It should work, right?
That's the IT guy in me.
Yeah, there you go.
All right. I'm sorry. You were saying.
So making these distinctions is difficult, and I think that's really the only way to kind of get to the bottom of and to have a conversation that could actually address the root causes. Now, you know, something that you talk about in your book is the difference between environment and culture, right? Or race and culture. And I do think that that is also a thing. So, you know, while, you know, one kid might grow up where they literally need to steal to survive. And, you know, but today, because of certain music, because of certain icons, because of, you know, the culture, it's also like a cool thing to do. You know, there's also that. And I think it's a, you know, it's a feedback loop in that sense. So maybe something that started out of survival or a need then evolved into something that then was negatively influential. And so I think you're right, like you can't just blame one thing. And there are people who are able to choose differently, but that doesn't mean that those factors aren't an extreme influence, and that especially in certain circumstances and environments, it's very, very difficult to see outside of, unless someone has a type of experience or mentor or opportunity that allows for a different path.
Okay. Normally I would go to Nicole, but she's having some issues. She'll
I'm
be
back
back on in a
here.
moment. Yeah, she just messaged me. Um, I hear what you're saying. I agree with you that it is complex. There is a cultural aspect that comes into play in certain circumstances. I personally think that if we were to look at the variety of crimes that are happening, um, majority of them are not necessarily coming from a place of complete desperation, right? There are so many people that are in desperate situations who purposely choose not to make that decision. Um, Yet other people decide to do that. And so I think these are personal decisions that are made, um, to go that extra length, to take from someone, to commit crimes, to sell drugs, right? And I see, I've heard of circumstances where people say, "Oh, I had to do this to survive," yet their neighbor didn't necessarily have to do that. Um, why is that the case?
Well,
Maybe they're
how would
telling the
you
truth.
define, or what do you think motivates them if it's not complete desperation? And I understand that people have different thresholds of where they might
Yeah.
feel completely desperate. And I think that has a lot to do with their upbringing and indoctrination. But what then motivates them to say sell drugs, take drugs, commit a crime if it's not desperation, in your opinion?
I think personally, it comes down to what's easier, right? So I would say the vast majority of, let's say, nonviolent crimes, if it's theft, anything related to drugs, it's very uh, short-sighted. It's not a long-term kind of thing. It's oriented to be quote unquote survival, but it's very short-sighted. If you can make some quick money in an easy fashion, and if you live in a destitute area where drugs are being sold and drugs are being consumed, it's an easier way to make money in a very quick manner in a short period of time, then that's the easy thing to do. It's a lot harder to find a job in, say, like a more dangerous area where there are less businesses. So then maybe you have to commute to another area to do so. You have to buy a particular outfit. You have to look presentable. That takes far more effort. I remember when I was in high school, there were kids who just sold weed by happenstance just because they knew someone, right? It takes very little effort to get your hands on some drugs, um, and to sell it and make some cash. So yeah, there's always going to be some sort of black market that exists, and getting into certain black market things like drugs is really easy. It's really quick.
Well, it's interesting because then it's a matter of tracing back, and I don't think Nicole's back. I'd be curious since she has a background in psychology. Is something that is a factor in what you're describing is impulse control, the
Right.
ability to have a goal or a desire and work towards getting it, as opposed to preferring immediate satisfaction or doing something that's maybe easier, although there may be negatives or destructive effects or risks involved. That comes down to a parenting issue. And if you grow up in a household that you don't have a structure and a support system and parenting that teaches you those types of things, again, it's going to be very difficult. Now, everything that I'm saying, just understand, it's not about excusing something, it's about understanding it. And I think because it sounds like what you have an issue with is when it comes as like a justification or making it okay. But I think there's a conversation to be had that is tracing back to the root causes and contributing factors. That's not an excuse, but if we can better come up with solutions to evolve it.
Yeah, and I have no problem, with someone like yourself trying to understand what exactly is the cause of it. Even down to firsthand accounts. Someone may personally feel like I had no other choice, even though you and I know and looking at the circumstance, yeah, you had other choices. But that's how they personally felt. So we have to figure out why do they feel that way? What's the root cause of it? You already know me. I feel like the majority of issues that we see today, the root of it comes from family and child upbringing, right? And especially when you're talking about stuff like crime, most of the crime that we were talking about is very short-sighted. And the biggest predictor of success is delayed gratification. So if you understand delayed gratification, you wouldn't really become a drug dealer. You would try to look for other options. You would try to look for other things because you would understand there's a bigger picture. Nicole, are you back with us?
I am. Can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you.
Okay.
You can jump in.
That's
Okay,
better.
great.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, I agree. If someone can delay their gratification, they wouldn't be a drug dealer. But the other piece of the puzzle is, do they have someone in their lives that ever modeled what success looks like and what living according to values looks like? I think that's the other part of the picture. In addition to like how our culture just glamorizes having a lot of money, and that becomes the value.
Yeah, I mean that's a good point. But you were before you got cut out before, you were going to say something about what we were talking about earlier. Um,
Do you think I remember that after all those technical issues? I don't know what I was going to say.
I'm trying to remember what I was talking about. I think I was mentioning kind of a counter example of someone who doesn't have resources or any family support and is young and has to kind of do what they have to do to survive, and sometimes that involves committing crimes. I don't know if that rings a bell at all, but some
do you want to
I don't.
have a comment, Nicole?
Yeah, I think Nicki's right. And the other thing I see a lot is if kids were raised in a lot of different bad foster homes, so they have like chronic trauma from all the experiences.
Nicole, I think it's happening again. Your microphone.
I'm sorry. Okay.
Oh no.
Oh man, I really wanted to hear what she had to say.
Me too.
But I think what she was indicating was basically the childhood aspect, especially if they experience all different types of trauma. It's just terrible upbringing, and to me, it's no surprise when a child goes through that particular experience that they have all different types of bad outcomes. They don't learn crucial positive lessons. They don't have positive role models, or people that they could trust. They basically see themselves as continuous survivors of a situation. Um, so I always bring everything back to family and child upbringing, and family planning. I think that it's the most essential thing when it comes to our society or any society. So when you start to understand childhood development or just general psychology, you start to understand how crucial it is and almost how predictive someone's outcome can be, depending on what they experienced as a child and how they were able to mitigate those particular traumas when they were a kid. You can experience trauma as a child and then find a way to work through it and go farther in life. But there are a good amount of people who don't, and they're left to pick up the pieces alone.
Yeah, definitely. I think there's also a big disparity. Speaking of, this is something I wanted to ask you before, so and I didn't get a chance to, which is about therapy and finding support from people who are certified in the field and knowledgeable and things like that, but who also can kind of understand where you come from, because that's something that I see as a huge lack with the people that I speak to who are either incarcerated or were, is that the social services often are very out of touch, and even when they're able to get coverage from medical or whatever, if they figure out how to do that, like the people, the offerings are not really in tune with their lifestyle, the challenges that they've faced, their life experience. And I haven't heard a lot of people find that helpful, but I know that you've had success in being able to get professional to work with and reflect on your life. And I was just curious how you found that.
I think for me, I didn't have anything severe as a kid, so it's not like I was physically abused, sexually abused, or anything like that. I think that requires a certain type of therapy. Um, for myself, I did experience, um, childhood issues, I would say. Um, I don't know. It's weird for me to say trauma for what I experienced. I just had an unstable childhood, and I had a lot of things that I had to figure out um, and work through. I suppressed my feelings. I didn't really talk about certain things. I even suppressed certain events in my life for a number of years um, that I completely forgot about until it was brought up to me later. But as far as getting help, it has to come from the person. You have to first realize that you actually need help. And that's actually one of the biggest hurdles for a lot of people. A lot of people would rather deny that there's anything wrong and suffer than admit that they're imperfect and try to get potential help. So I think the first part is just finding out, or not finding out, but admitting that your life is not going in the direction that you think it's supposed to be going. Um, and you have to come to that realization before you can actually improve. Um, as far as finding help, once you accept that you do need help, finding help is a lot easier. Um, yes, you can find therapists who may or may not fit or understand where you may be coming from. For me, I think my issues are pretty general, but I lucked out. For the therapist that I found, it was like one shot. I went to therapy two separate times. First shot with the therapist was exactly what I needed. It was type of therapy where, like the first number of sessions was me crying and just getting stuff out, and she was very caring. Later on in life, I needed another therapist for a different type of issue, and she was just straight to the point, a matter of fact, and but supportive. And that was the type of thing I needed at the time. So I got lucky as far as finding it in the first place. But I think there are people who find a therapist doesn't match them and they give up completely. You have to keep going because one therapist doesn't speak for every therapist that's out there, just like any other profession. So you have to have the will to want to continue to seek help. And I find that there are situations where I talk to people who, on their second attempt, find that perfect therapist, and it works, and they continue to go to them, and they get help. So the two big components is basically admitting you need help and continuing to try and seek for help. Even if the first attempt doesn't work, you try a second or third time if need be.
Right. And it's interesting. I think you bring up a really important process, which is trust building and not letting your first experience dictate how you assume every future experience will be. And I think that plays a lot into, people who grow up in, impoverished neighborhoods and the culture and relationship with law enforcement, both what you're taught about them, your direct experiences with them, and how you react to them in a interaction going forward because you believe they are all one way. And I think that goes for, like people who might seek a social worker or a therapist, and they have a negative experience, and so they write them all off. But I find that there's a lot of distrust in just the government in general, and social services, and obviously law enforcement. So that's another factor I think that is a huge contributor to what we're talking about, to people who end up committing crimes or end up in prison and then become institutionalized, and that's a whole other track in itself.
Well, I know you spoke with or you keep in contact with inmates. Is that what does that seem to be like
That's
the biggest
general
thing for them?
sentiment. Yeah, that's exactly. There's like for example, there's someone who is preparing for their parole hearing. This person's been incarcerated for 30 years already. Lovely human being. They've been incarcerated since they were 17. And they're super nervous, obviously, about this hearing. And the parole board wants access to his psychological records. So all the conversations and sessions that he's had with a therapist, they want access to. And he has the ability to say no, but that will severely negatively impact his potential for release at the hearing, because then it might look like he's trying to hide something. However, but they could also sort through it and potentially twist something or find something. Who knows? He doesn't feel like he has anything to hide. But even that in itself, like, he went into those sessions believing that they were confidential, believing that they, it was a place where he could try to share openly and process and safely discuss things that were difficult for him while he's, going through the most difficult times of his life. So, like, that's just one example of the type of things that happen. But I also think just the backgrounds, and it's funny because I actually experienced this myself. When I was going through a really hard time, and had some pretty extreme adversity to do with, the FBI threatening me, the government potentially going to prison, and things like that. And I sought therapists to talk to, and kind of things that were going on. And while it was nice to have someone to talk to, I really didn't feel like they got it. Like, they were a little bit shocked by things I would tell them that were going on. And I felt uncomfortable being honest, because I felt like I was going to disturb them. So if I felt that way, I can only imagine how people who've seen the types of things that the people that I talk to in prison have seen, who, I feel very lucky to have gone through what I did, which is only a fraction of what other people have, but I feel like it gives me some insight and some ability to relate. And so I think people feel comfortable sharing with me because I do kind of get it on some level. And, that can mean the world. But I don't think that government services, for the most part, offer that, unfortunately.
Yeah, I can understand that. and I can understand that particular circumstance where his thoughts and feelings are going to could potentially be used against him. Um,
Yeah.
and that sounds like a terrible feeling because, as someone who's been to therapy, the reason you're able to open up is because it's almost like a judgment-free area, and here his own words could be used against him. And yeah, in some way, I kind of understand why that is the circumstance. You know, I guess from that aspect, as a prisoner, he is a property of the state. So he has no, I guess, I'm assuming this is the way it's set up, but he has no right to privacy. Um, but at the same time, he's still a human being. And sometimes we have irrational thoughts. Sometimes we need to work through things. We experience trauma. Um, so it just sucks in that particular circumstance for him to have to, where he's finally able to bear all the things that's sitting on his chest and it's weighing on him to have it come back to be used against him.
Right. And I think that's just anecdotal, but it speaks to the general distrust of the system, if you will, or professionals or law enforcement and things like that. And I think that's really sad because I see a lot of communication breakdowns and people violating their probation over stupid little things because they get they feel attacked, they feel that things aren't fair, and often they're not. um, and and people who are in somewhat low level positions but have a good amount of power, they have power over people's liberty, they take advantage of it. And so, you know going back to the theme of this, to do with poverty, I do think there's just there's cultural aspects. There's not always the best education and communication tools and self-reflection, um, that people maybe who come from different backgrounds are able to have to look at a situation and think like, okay, well, I just need to defer right now. I need to suck it up and just do what I'm told, because otherwise it's going to mean, I go to prison for 18 months. Because what I unfortunately see time and time again is some little incident that could have been nothing. It could have been diffused with the right type of communication, and it's not, because egos are involved, and people feel very threatened, as they should, and they react on that. Again, touching on what you were saying about the delayed gratification and impulse control, and then they're back in prison for 18 months. And this might be after they got a job. Maybe they were able to get a job, but now they're back in prison. So now that job is gone and that opportunity is gone. And their people around them start to lose faith in them. They're angry too because it doesn't make sense. There's just, it's hard. It's very hard.
So I guess to kind of link it to the topic, we talked about before going to prison, being incarcerated. You touched on it for a second. After coming out of prison, to try to prevent them
Yeah.
from going back in, but also prevent them from basically living in poverty. And actually, I just something that came to my mind. I know we've talked. People have brought up the topic of job applications. Should you or should you not include, do you have a felony? Because that could be something that's a quick eliminator for someone who's legitimately uh, trying to start over in their life. You know, do you think that's something that should be removed? Do you think it's unhelpful to have it? Do you think it's beneficial to have it? What do you think about that?
I think it's severely limiting. Again, it goes back to making distinctions. And I think there may be cases where, a background check is relevant, and especially with certain types of security clearance or just certain levels of leadership, perhaps. I think honestly, the biggest issue is prejudice, is that if we as a society understood um, what if we understood the criminal justice system better and had a more humane relationship to incarceration, then I think having a box that says you went to prison wouldn't be such a big problem, because people wouldn't automatically uh, recoil and say no, right? Unfortunately, I think it does limit opportunities a lot. And then especially the relationship to, if someone's on probation and holding down job, very difficult. But I don't think I think if you're hiring someone, you should be allowed to ask, whatever questions you want. And the person can choose to answer them or not. But I think the issue of how we view anyone who's been to prison is more what we should evolve, rather than trying to make all these like regulations and red tape.
I agree with you. I think personally, like if it's a job that really cares that much about hiring someone who has a criminal history, they're running a background check anyways, right? To see what that is. Um, you know, I'm pretty sure, granted, I'm not a law expert or anything like that, but I'm pretty sure that there are some felonies that are, like technicalities and not, severely egregious. Maybe there was a felony that has nothing to do with the type of business you're in. Like if you're a bank and you have someone who has a history of money laundering, obviously you don't want to hire that person, but you'll find that out running a background check. To me, that seems relevant, and maybe you don't want to take that risk as a business. But if you're hiring a line cook and you just need a line cook, he's going to be in the back. He's not going to be at the register. It doesn't matter if he has a criminal history of theft per se. You're willing to take that risk. So, but it's the idea that we're supposed to be allowing people a second chance or even a third chance. But I think that that box saying, have you committed a felony, yes or no, and having to be forced to check it to be some sort of shortcut for an employer is limiting, because, like you said, it doesn't tell a story. A background check can at least give a better idea as to what someone experienced. It also matters how long ago was it? Was it a year ago? Was it 15 years ago? All these things are relevant. And I
Well, and
think,
that's the thing, is it gives this sense of false security. Like, just because someone doesn't have a felony doesn't mean they won't steal from you. Maybe they're so good
right,
at it they never get caught. Like again, it goes back to making distinctions. But we want these fail-safe, simple ways to feel safe and in control, and life just doesn't work that way.
right. Nicole is back with us. Nicole, you want to jump in?
Yeah, I don't know if you guys covered this or not, but in our state, we have lists of employers who will hire people with um, felonies on their record. And the problem is it's all like basically minimum wage jobs. And so when someone's out of prison and they are homeless or they're in another program, and once they get a job, they'll lose their housing, it's not enough to sustain them. And, they're really stuck in a bad spot. So if we could work on two fronts, and one is sort of reducing the stigma around hiring people that have gotten out of prison, and two, giving them more skills while they're in prison, and helping them find jobs that they can sustain themselves on. Because right now it looks like we're setting them up for failure when they come out.
Yeah, and that's a good point. And actually, that reminds me of Germany. I learned a little bit as far as like the German model. What they do is basically their prisons look like our like community colleges, right? Um, what they end up doing is basically recognizing that this person is going to enter into society again. So to them, it makes no sense to treat them like an animal, right? You already lost your freedom, right? So you're confined. But what we're going to try and do while you're here is treat you like, like another human being. We're going to put you in situations for you to be responsible, and many of the prisons, they allow them to cook their own food. They have what like basically like a dormitory, and they in many cases put them in situations to learn job skills. So they do everything that they can possibly to try to set them up for success when they do leave, so they don't reoffend and come back in. And I think the way we have it set up today, um, is kind of, we have like a throw away the key kind of mentality. And I actually don't really like that mentality. I think there are very few circumstances where we should have that mentality, but I think there are so many people who get wrapped up in certain things that they should have a second chance. There should be some sort of programs to help to set them up so when they do come out, they're not being constantly victimized by the system, uh, to the point where I get why they might feel defeated. I get why they would repeat and do the same thing that led them to come back in. It might be all they know, and they never had a chance to learn any particular skill. They never had a chance from the job market. Um, like you said, we talked about childhood. All these different things that contributed to it. But I think the way that we're set up right now in our, at least in the prisons, is basically we treat people like animals. Um, I mean, that's just kind of my take on it.
I
You're not
totally
wrong.
agree, and I think that more, yeah, and more than skills, because there are programs, where you can learn trades and cooking classes and different things like that. But I think that what people don't learn has to do with the dehumanization, just basic self-esteem and emotional self-reliance, uh, and communication, effective communication skills, interpersonal skills. It's a very different environment, and so to expect someone to go from essentially surviving in the jungle, and yeah, they might know how to sew, but then they need to go on dress up for a job interview and answer questions, and maybe deal with people that are, like interpersonally hostile, because we've all had bosses like that. But if you've come from literally life or death situations where if someone looks at you the wrong way or speaks with you in a tone and you need to defend yourself, you're not going to do well in those circumstances in like the outside world. And I think that's the biggest missing resource for people, is to really have a healthy transition to be able to process what they've gone through and really, um, you know, accept themselves again, because there's just so much, I think, self-rejection and violence that goes on in prison, and then sort of readapt into society. And what right now is this solution is people go to halfway houses that, for some people that I speak to, are worse than prison. Some people would rather stay in prison to live out their sentence than go to a halfway house, because there's a lot of drugs. The people that run them are, not always the most competent, people, and people get away with a lot, and it's not a nice environment to be in. So having to like get your shit together, get your act together, excuse me, in a halfway house is like in some ways 10 times harder than if you were able to like have your own place, which is also very difficult just coming out of prison.
Nicole, did you want to add to that?
So did you speak about the mental health crisis already?
No, actually, you can add.
Oh, okay. So, I mean, I think that's what part of what Nicki's touching on is we take people who are already traumatized, at least a good portion of the population. We put them in a place that is going to re-traumatize every day, and the mental health services they're given in prison are really negligible. So how do we expect them to come out of that situation any better? It's just not going to happen. And then when you add to the fact that we're using prisoners to house people with mental health conditions that really need a form of treatment we don't have anymore here, and it just compounds the problem beyond beyond anything that we've seen in several decades here.
Now, I do have a question, and I don't know if you can answer this, but why is it that the case that the prison system has become the main facility for mental health?
I mean, some people say it started happening when they shut down the mental health hospitals, the institutions, which were on the whole very bad places. But when they threw that away and insisted everyone get treatment within their community, they didn't make sure that there are enough community centers that can treat them and that there are enough qualified people who staff the community centers to treat them. Right now, the mental health community centers are staffed primarily by trainees, maybe even people who don't have their degrees yet. And then when they get enough experience, they move on. And so we're sending our sickest population to trainees in the mental health field. Except, some people who have money and the resources to go to top-notch mental health professionals, then they can do it. But for the most part, if you don't have a lot of money or great insurance, you're going to be stuck with a trainee.
Hmm.
Right, and there are a lot of ways that someone with mental health issues can get picked up by police. And then, again, not really having the skills or the resources to handle that situation. Often it escalates and they end up in prison. And I honestly think like it's a money thing. Prisons make money off prisoners. So why put more money into mental health when they can make money off of inmates? And I know that's a very blunt object or like a overgeneralization, but I think there's some truth to it. And I think it's extremely sad. It's extremely sad because there are a lot of people in prison who need nothing more than mental health support.
Right. Um, to pivot just a little bit, since Nicole's back here with us, she had kind of hinted at it before about the district attorneys. Um, this might sound like kind of like a vague question, but what do you think is the biggest problem that you see that is contributed by the district attorneys, or by the different prosecutors, when it comes to, let's say, low level or even high level crimes?
Is that for me?
Yes, I'm sorry.
Oh, okay, sure. Um, so I think the explosion, the perfect storm, was having these kind of prosecutors at the same time we have the defund the police movement, because the combination of demoralizing the police, and in some areas they actually did defund them, at least to some extent, with prosecutors who aren't doing their jobs and refuse to prosecute certain cases because of their ideological beliefs. That is the perfect storm for increased criminality, and you're just going to get more victims when that happens. Philly is having such a hard problem, a difficult time right now with crime, and especially gun crime. So the DA was just like not prosecuting crimes, any gun crimes. Well, some, yes, but on the whole, he didn't. And then the police just get sick of catching the same guys, arresting them, and then they're let go. And I know that that's happened in other cities too. And that's why we are where we are.
Okay. But why? I mean, you had mentioned that there is a ideological, you know, an ideological situation that's happening for some of the DAs. But let's say a DA who's not ideologically driven, not a super progressive, not with the social justice cause, where is their negligence basically coming from? Because I know we talked previously about DAs who just want to get a win, a quick win, put a notch in their belt, and keep it moving. Do you think that is a huge contributor that's leading to the downfall of crime and punishment?
Well, that is definitely a problem. I think that the culture in district attorneys' offices should not be on wins, because that's, like we saw that in the Kyle Rittenhouse case. We've seen that in a lot of different cases where the win at all costs just puts innocent people in jail or threatens to. And so if that's kind of maybe what the progressive DAs think that they're fighting against, but they're taking it really far. An average DA, I would say it's a staffing issue where assistant district attorneys are expected to handle 100, like a caseload of 100 cases, and they don't have the time that they should have to put into the cases. So that's kind of the main sort of boring problem.
Understood. Nicki, did you want to add into anything?
I just wanted to comment on exactly what Nicole was saying, and the culture of winning is antithetical to justice. And what I think is probably the most unfortunate effect, besides innocent people going to prison or people pressuring to take deals that are beyond the scope of perhaps a crime that they did commit, is that it swings the pendulum so far in one direction that you have the overcorrection that I think Nicole is referring to. Is that then there's no trust in the justice system. People think that, well, anyone can just, claim abuse, and we don't necessarily take it seriously. And what I think, Nicole, which you have the experience of working for victims of crimes, and you know their side, and you know what they've been through, and it's difficult to get justice because people will use the other narrative to their benefit. And so again, it comes back to, not just making reality-based distinctions, but instead going in these extreme directions and cherry picking cases that support a certain narrative instead of looking at all the factors and the complexities of the issue, and really just focusing on justice, on, is there evidence of a crime? And that should be the only thing that should lead to prosecution. It should have nothing to do with getting a promotion. Should have nothing to do with what the media says, ever. I think that's one of the biggest issues contributing to injustices is there's pressure, say, on a city or an office to, to reform bail. So then they go like in one extreme direction, and then there's this pressure, no, bring back bail because there's crime, and there's no kind of objective approach because everything is politicized, and that I think is the biggest like kind of poison in the system is the people using the justice system for personal agenda and politics.
Nicole, did you want to respond?
Just that if we could keep prosecutors and maybe defense attorneys too for a while, if we could say you can't join CNN or MSNBC for a certain amount of time after your famous case, that might help things a lot.
I hear that. Nicki, you brought up bail and the constant switch from going from no bail to in response to increased crime to wanting bail back again. I personally think that there has to be some sort of middle ground. While I understand that bail could affect certain people disproportionately, and maybe there are low-level crimes that should have lower bail requirements. I don't think in certain situations we should have people who are clearly dangerous. I think that's the biggest thing. If they're dangerous, there should be a higher mark for them to get out, just from the stance of potential risk, potential safety risk to the general public. While I understand you're guilty until proven innocent, I don't know if the approach of
it's
no,
supposed to be innocent until proven guilty.
I'm sorry, innocent. I'm sorry. Yeah, it's been a long day. I'm sorry, everybody. I just had some coffee.
I mean, I think it's a relevant, it's an appropriate slip up because
Yeah.
But yes, to your point, that is the way it's supposed to be.
Right. And I understand that aspect, but at the same time, it doesn't make any sense to me to put the potential public at risk from someone who is committing crimes to just constantly get put out and out and out. And I think that's what we're seeing in certain cities where they're like, I can give you examples in New York City. There was one guy who was arrested, I think it was like 4 times in the same day. And he kept getting released due to COVID protocol. He was, granted, it was theft. I think it was like retail theft. But he kept getting caught. He was a terrible criminal. But it's stuff like that where that seems kind of ridiculous. There should be some sort of hurdle to kind of keep people safe. There were circumstances in New York as well where someone, I think there was a situation where he had threatened someone and or attempted to harm someone, got arrested, come out, and it went back to that same person to potentially victimize him again. This is where having some sort of hindrance, some sort of bail to put a buffer in time to prevent people who are innocent from being potentially victimized again. I just think that there needs to be a more balanced approach. Like I don't think the concept of all or nothing works.
Well, and it's interesting because I could give just as many examples as you gave of people who, if we, probably everyone on this call would agree, they didn't need to be kept in prison for the years before it took to fight their case. That there were, many reasons why they should have been let out and they weren't. And they ended up, beating their case because they weren't guilty. And so anecdotes sometimes are like, the least scientific way of approaching things. And I don't have the study to cite it. I believe I read it in Malcolm Gladwell's Talking with Strangers, and it relates to this. It was a study on using AI to determine whether someone should be given bail or not. And so the AI ran all types of different you know, factors about the person, their history, demographics, even against statistics of people who have offended or reoffended in the past. Now, some people might say, and this is actually my gut reaction, that that is prejudicial, because just because other people who say have like come from this background or are this age tend to reoffend doesn't mean that this person will. And so my like instinct is that that is not the best way to go about it, that you should, you know, have a human being really evaluate and look at the big picture and be able to like talk to the person like a judge does. But what was interesting, and again, this is just one study, but it basically came up with the fact that judges were worse evaluators of character than the AI. Like when you weighed, you know, if they let someone out, how likely they were to reoffend or do something to break their bail conditions, than the AI statistics came up with. So I found that really interesting, and what it says to me is not necessarily that we need to use AI, although maybe there is a value that it can provide certain insights or data, but that the way we're doing things, the culture amongst judges and the process of granting someone bail is flawed. Now, I don't know enough about it, and there's obviously differences in the state versus the feds, but I think that there aren't enough consistent standards and checks and balances to make sure that the things that you're talking about are accounted for, and then the breakdowns where people are incarcerated pre-trial for years who shouldn't be are accounted for as well.
Okay. I hear what you're saying. Nicole, do you want to add to that?
So I think the main reason why we're having these bail problems is because the courts are overloaded and they can't get to everyone fast enough. So why is that? You know, that there's a whole host of reasons, but I know that every judge I ever met feels that they're overworked. And so, especially for, you know, for crimes that we do need bail, we need to make sure that we have enough judges who can assess the situation and the person can go before them and they're not in jail for a long time before, you know, they have their trial. I think that could go a long way. I don't think it's going to happen anytime soon, but that could really help.
But is it simply is it a politics thing? Is it simply like a money thing that's preventing, you know, the court system from operating more efficiently?
Yeah, it definitely feels that way. Like every court I've ever been in was extremely crowded. The judges don't have a lot of time. They don't feel like they have a lot of time. And they're making very important life and death decisions and decisions that will affect people for the rest of their lives. In a small amount of time, they feel very frazzled and like that, you know, they aren't giving it the time that it needs because they aren't given that time. But also, I think that they get jaded with all of that. And the last thing that you want is a jaded judge. So, you know, I don't know how you correct for that factor.
Yeah, I don't think you can. It's kind of like a cop who's worked in a tough neighborhood for a number of years. You know, it's almost like something you kind of expect, which is why, from my understanding, like alcoholism is, I don't want to say common, but it's prevalent when it comes to that particular profession. Um, but to kind of drive in, is it a is it simply just money, or is politics coming into play?
Politics definitely comes into play. It comes into play in all of this.
Well, and I
But
think really the issue is that it's not simply any one thing. It's a human problem. And, there are factors, even there's studies that have been done that some judges are more likely to make certain types of judgments before lunch versus after lunch. So, their hunger has to do with how sympathetic they might be to someone's story or situation. So I think I wish it was simple. I think that's the issue, is that it's a complex problem, and it doesn't really boil down to just one thing, because it's people at the end of the day. It's not, yes, we call it a system, but it's made up of individual people. And then within that, there's a culture as well.
That is an excellent point. Anecdotally, I hate going in front of any judge right before lunch. And some of them are much worse than others, but that's the worst time to go in front of any judge I've ever been in front of. And what does that say about our system when that's an issue?
Yeah, it's great. I mean, it's
well,
literally someone's life, liberty on the line, and whether the person, has had their McDonald's or not could make the difference.
well, I say we just bring them a Snickers bar, and then that increase your odds of having a
Yeah,
good trial.
I think maybe we just solved it. I think we just solved it. We need to get sponsored by Snickers.
Snickers saves the criminal justice system.
There you go.
Oh man.
Yeah.
Man, all of this is fascinating. It's extremely complex. I had hopes that we would solve everything in 2 hours, but I don't think that's going to happen.
We need two more, just two
We
more.
need 2 more hours. Um, but yeah, I think it's extremely complex, like you said. I actually, you know what? I do have a question for Nicole. What is the one thing that we are not talking about when it comes to the criminal justice system?
Oh, um, I think that we're not talking about the how the personalities of judges might come into play. That's the one thing that shocked me about the practice of law. Like, you think, okay, the law is this, and so when this person comes before this judge, that's the outcome that should happen. And then you learn that things are so affected by the judge's personality and idiosyncrasies, and affected in a big way, like not even a little way. So, and again, like, what's the solution for that? I don't have it, but it was definitely something that I found astounding.
What about you, Nikki? What do you think is the biggest thing about the criminal justice system? Um, Actually, can you hear me, Nikki? You just sent me a message. Nicole, you can hear me, right?
Yep, I can hear you.
I think Nikki's having some sort of technical issue. She sent me a message saying that she couldn't hear me. Um, Let me just message her. It's you, Nikki. It's not me. um, let's see if she's able to come back on here. Well, she'll figure it out. She'll figure it out at some point here. Oh, well, maybe she's disconnecting and she'll come back on. Um, do you have any particular examples that you were talking about as far as I know it's anecdotal, but just to give people an idea, when you say the attitude of the judge, was there a particular example that sticks out to you where that really came into play in your case?
So yes, and this was a family law case. It was a domestic violence case, and the judge was, I don't want to say biased, but she had a lot of opinions and expressed them freely, and it was clear to me that that she couldn't relate to mothers for some reason. I don't know why, but she talked about her son a lot, and it was like I felt like she was looking at all of the defendants in the case more as like her son. It's really hard to put this into words because obviously it's nothing that could be proven. But their individual biases definitely play a role. Now, I am not a fan of implicit bias, or at least not in the form of like Harvard's IAT, because it's been debunked. So we're not left with any really good tools to address that, other than to request of judges to be aware that they might be biased. And that doesn't always work.
I was just about to say, does that go over well?
No, any kind of training, like we're always saying these judges need more domestic violence training, because some of the things they say to the victims are just, you want you can't believe that someone's saying that to another person, much less a judge. And they do get a certain amount of training, but it's like can go in one ear and out the other.
I gotcha. Nikki, just to make sure you can hear us, right?
Yes, I can.
Okay. I was going to ask you as well, what do you think is the biggest thing about the criminal justice system that we're not talking about?
I didn't hear the beginning of Nicole's answer, but based on the example, I think it might be similar, which is, well, there are two things. There's the individual kind of human flaws that impede justice, and related specifically around the culture of winning. I think that's one of the biggest things. I don't know that that's not being talked about, but it's not being talked about enough. And I think there need to be checks and balances for prosecutors. I think they shouldn't, if they are prosecuting and winning every case, that's a problem. Our conviction rates are a problem. And it does, I think the misperception that people have is that, oh, like they're just so good at catching the bad guys. No. They're so good at beating people into submission because they have endless resources and the ability to threaten people, that they can create crimes and basically like bully people into taking plea deals because it's easier, and many people realistically will spend less time in prison if they take a plea deal than if they take things to trial. So there are many unethical ways that the system, quote unquote, works because it's all under kind of the law. Like they're not necessarily always committing crimes when they do these things. They're allowed to do these things, but it doesn't support the pursuit of justice. And then the other factor is really the human factor, and just you know the amount of power that prosecutors and judges have is tremendous. And I don't know that we prepare them enough, that they get, which again is, I think, what Nicole is speaking to, that they get the right kind of training, and also that they really understand the gravity of their decisions. I personally think that anyone who has the power to put someone in prison should have to experience prison. And ideally, that means literally staying in prison. But even if they just were to visit a prison, speak to people who live in prison, really, incorporate the understanding of what they're doing to a person when they make rulings or prosecute someone. And of course, prison is necessary. But I don't think there's enough weight brought to, the process itself and really understanding that responsibility in our society.
If I'm to add my 2 cents as someone who, you two are obviously more involved in criminal justice than I am, but as someone from the outside, the criminal justice system seems so heavily, I don't want to say motivated, but so heavily moved by money. Um, it takes a significant amount of money to defend yourself in trial. Um, it takes money to get out on bail. Um, it takes money to basically shield you as best as possible from a negative outcome, especially if you're innocent. Um, and I don't know if there's anything that you can do to solve that. There are court fees that are unavoidable. There are lawyer fees that are unavoidable. If you want adequate representation, you're going to have to pay an adequate amount of money for it. Asking for a public defender, uh, just as much as Nicole was talking about how DAs feel overwhelmed, I'm sure public defenders feel, doubly overwhelmed. I've heard different situations where they literally have 15 minutes to look at an entire case that might be complex. And that's not enough time to try to defend someone from going into jail who may actually be innocent, which could be contributing into them suggesting that this person take a plea deal, just to avoid getting a bad outcome for them that goes even farther. So, I think about the money aspect. I don't know if there's any way to fix it. I don't know if there's anything you can do about it, but it's something that sticks out in my mind. Nicole, what do you have to say?
I agree with that. And I think that's like every aspect of life. I have a hard time thinking of any aspect of society that isn't, like, I guess, motivated by money.
I mean, I guess the main difference is that there's so much at stake, you know,
Yes.
by
Yes.
not having it. Yeah. I think that to me is like the stark thing. Like the fact that you can go to jail for a number of years, lose your freedom, even though you didn't commit a crime, simply because you don't have enough resources to defend yourself. Um, it's. Oh, what were you gonna say?
I just agree with you, and it's even in areas that don't involve criminal law, like in family law. Um, Most people do not have the money to finance a divorce or a custody battle, or anything like that. And that affects the rest of their lives too. So definitely, even more so in the criminal case.
So I guess my other question is, what can the average person do, in regards to the criminal justice system to advocate for a fairer system? What can the average person actually do? Anybody can jump in.
Well, I think knowing their rights, first of all, and understanding, their constitutional rights if they were to ever, have the misfortune of being involved in the criminal justice system. But jury duty is a way that people, citizens are involved. Unfortunately, a lot of people who have higher education, higher paying jobs and things like that often get out of jury duty. And I think that's a shame, because I think we really need people on juries who are thoughtful and make finer distinctions and can, take in a lot of information. I think also educating themselves about the things that we're talking about, or engaging in conversations with people who have direct experience, and most especially people who are either in prison or have been in prison. Because I know for me, that was really the most eye-opening thing, is really, the human beings who are enduring what they are, and having to deal with such corruption. It's hard to hear those stories and not care.
What about you, Nicole? What's something that the average person can do to, advocate for a fair system?
So I think learning as much as you can about our system and where it works, where it doesn't work, and calling your congressman, calling your local politicians. I think that the more our politicians realize people are watching, and they want some real effective work to be done, not just defund the police. I think that's where the real change is going to come in. And the other thing I just wish everyone knew is, don't talk to the police until you've spoken with an attorney, even if you've done nothing wrong, maybe especially if you've done nothing wrong, because, all of your words can be used against you, and they will be.
Yeah, that's one thing. I watch a lot of crime shows, and I see these guys, and I'm like, don't talk to them. And what's funny is, like, the guys who have like criminal history, they know right off the bat, I want to talk to my lawyer. It's always the people who it's like their first time. Even if they're guilty, this is their first time doing something. And I'm like, man, all these guys just straight up start answering all the police officers' questions. And sometimes the cops have no idea. They have nothing. And here you go spilling the beans. So it sounds like me advocating for people to get away with crimes, but I'm just thinking like,
But you
I'm
can
just
be
thinking like,
innocent and say something that is later used against you. And so,
yeah,
definitely do not talk to police without legal representation.
yeah, exactly. And actually, this is part of my ignorance, but the judges in a lot of places are voted in, or is it everywhere that they're voted in?
No, sometimes they're appointed. A lot of
Okay,
times they're appointed. Yeah.
Yeah.
okay. I guess it depends on the state that they're voted in, or
Yeah, and it depends on the court. And so
okay,
sometimes even judges, like in Philadelphia, the judges that are elected, if there's a vacancy or they're moving someone around, um, the another judge can still be appointed, and then they'll have to run for election at the end of that term. So it can get
okay,
confusing.
Well, and one thing is that federal judges, Supreme Court judges, and the like are appointed, and they have lifetime appointments, which I think is also maybe not ideal. I mean, people get old. Like there's certain constraints on having a driver's license as you age. I think deciding someone's liberty might also be of concern.
Well, ideally, we would have limitations on terms where people have power, including for
Yeah,
politicians.
yeah.
But it's always difficult to get people to limit how long they have power for. Um, so I think that's the other problem, especially because they're appointed. So in many ways, they're considered like being politically motivated appointments. So, if Trump appointed this judge, he's now a Trump appointed judge. Um, it's that kind of thing. They get linked to whoever they were appointed by, um, regardless if they're fair or not. So, those things kind of come into play. Um,
Definitely.
does anybody want to add their 2 cents in who might be listening? You can request to speak. Anybody going once?
Any questions, comments?
Concerns?
Coffee, tea?
Anybody want to ask a lawyer a question? It's not every day you get to ask a lawyer a question without them charging you. And Nicole is here for free.
She's laughing. I'm like, I have some questions. No.
Actually, I kind of do have a question for Nicole.
Okay.
What is because we were kind of talking about earlier as far as how family is one of the bigger contributors when it comes to leading to someone ending up in prison. Are you almost seeing like a pipeline effect within family law?
I wouldn't say family law in general, but it's definitely there in domestic violence situations, yes. And sometimes the root of it goes so far down to, I'd say, infancy or toddlerhood, like those attachment issues, never having a secure attachment figure. That those are really, really hard to treat, and it takes a long time to treat it if that's the issue.
I understand. What is something that, like, if someone had to go and be part of the family law process, I'm sorry, like having to have like a family attorney or something of that nature regarding their family, whether it be, like you said, domestic abuse or um, uh, I'm forgetting the word, custody. What's something that people should know before they seek someone like yourself?
Know that most lawyers are going to charge you every time they talk to you, every time they send you an email. So have all your questions written out ahead of time so that you can be succinct, and you're not going to take up a lot more of their time thinking about it, which is going to cost you more money.
Understood. It doesn't look like anybody wants to jump in, so I will give you both final words, anything related to the topic that you want to say. We'll start with Nicki.
Thank you. Thank you so much for creating this space and for having the conversation. I think it's a very important one, just living in a country that prides itself on freedom. I think we're severely lacking in living up to being the land of the free. I think that our rights are too easily uh, overridden and revoked in ways that most people are unaware of. Although more and more people are waking up, I think, you know, we're seeing different narratives kind of fall apart before our eyes, and hopefully that will help people realize that it's not just certain demographics or that it can't happen to them, because it's a fundamental issue. And like I said, I think that just talking to people, I'm on Twitter if people want to follow me or ask me questions. I feel very I'm always excited to talk about this, as well as I recommend there's organizations like one called Adopt an Inmate, where you can communicate with someone who's incarcerated and just learn more from people who've lived it, because I think that's really the best way to educate yourself.
Okay. Nicole, any
Yeah,
final words?
if I can plug an organization, I want to plug the Prisoners Project. And they are there to help the prisoners and their families, especially their children. And, that's a dynamic that we forget about, that it's not just affecting, specific prisoners, but their whole families, their whole ecosystem, their next generation. And if we can do anything to make that process easier and better for them, then we should do it. Again,
Okay.
Prisoners Project.
All right, and thank you, Nicole, for the final words. I guess for myself, this was more of an exploration. Both Nicki and Nicole have more experience when it comes to the criminal justice system than myself. So I hope I'm not the only one that learned from both of them in this conversation. Um, and it's always appreciated when I can add to knowledge or just have me question certain things that I've thought about before, but hear another perspective. So that's the point of me having spaces like this. So I appreciate everybody who's here listening. We do this every week, Wednesday, 7:30 p.m. Eastern Standard. Different topics each week with different people. So once again, I really appreciate both Nicki and Nicole for joining us in this conversation and providing their insight. So thank you too.
Thank you.
Thank you. It was nice to meet you, Nicole.
Nice to meet you too. Have a good night, everyone.
All right. Take care, everyone.
Have a good night. Thank you again.
Bye.
Bye.